Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the People Agenda podcast from Lace Partners. I'm super excited today to be recording the latest in our mini-series, What is a CPO? And in this mini-series, we're exploring the role of the Chief People Officer or the HR Director or the CHRO, People and Culture Director, whatever we want to call them, from a series of different angles. And we're chatting to people who have held or are in that role currently, and in a range of businesses, big, small, evolving, merging, and across a range of segments. So, we are very segment agnostic with a whole series of different challenges and experiences to share with our audience. My name's Debbie Mitchell, and I'm the host of today's podcast, and I'm part of the team here at Lace. One aspect of my role is managing our CPO network. So the network is a small but perfectly formed group of CPOs who meet and collaborate to talk about the future of the function and share some of our challenges and experiences, and wherever possible, collaborate on solutions too. Today, our CPO is one of our network members, so I'm really delighted to welcome Nicky Bliss. Hi, Nicky.
Hello, nice to be here.
Nicky, I'm going to go straight in and then we'll come back to a quick intro afterwards. And I'm going to throw the kind of killer question. What is a CPO? Give us your perspective.
Goodness me, that is straight in. What is a CPO? I'm quite clear on this. And I think when you reach C-suite or very senior exec level, you are first and foremost a leader of the business. So yes, I might be aligned to the people function. I might lead the people function and be part of the people function. But first and foremost, I am part of the executive team of leaders. And one day that might mean I'm signing off the payroll. But the next, it might mean I'm presenting to the board on various elements of the strategy. I think the businesses that work best work with a team of leaders that are almost sector or department, division, vertical agnostic. And the teams that win come at leadership from an enterprise leadership point of view rather than a vertical specialism point of view. So I would say the CPO is first and foremost a leader, and they happen to lead the people team.
It's really interesting. Thank you. We'll dive into a bit more of that as we go through. But for now, just tell us a bit about how that perspective has grown. So what's been your career journey? How have you come to kind of some of that thought around what the CPO role is?
I'm definitely of the squiggly career variety. I started in recruitment. So when I graduated in the 90s, it was either recruitment or a state agency. And I went the recruitment route and started with Reed. And I had a fantastic start to my career with the Reed group, the Reed family. I did my CIPD qualification with them, fully sponsored at their college, and then moved into the dark side of HR with Barclays and Barclaycard. I'm Northamptonshire based, and Barclaycard head office, as it was, is there. So you either work there or you work for St Andrews Healthcare if you live in Northamptonshire. So I spent about 10 years with Barclays. And when I first started, you would no sooner have spoken to somebody at Barclays if you worked for Barclaycard than you would have spoken to somebody at HSBC. They were very, very separate. And then over the years, various financial crashes and so on, it became a much more integrated business. And I left for a very short time to go and do something else, and then was asked to come back and run a project for Barclays as a limited company. And that's when my interim career started. It was the days before IR35, when it was much more lucrative than it is now. All my fellow interims will be nodding their heads at that. And really, the projects and the assignments just kept coming after that. I enjoy networking. I've done a lot of networking. I think it's really important, whether you're in a permanent position or as an interim, just expands your horizons. And I did a lot of networking, and it led me into lots of different pieces of work. So in my career, I've worked at EasyJet in the aviation industry. I've worked, or travel industry, depending on your perspective. I've worked in utilities at a water company. I had a great stint with Louise Benford, who's the chief people officer at the AA, still is. And then more recently, I've been involved in fashion and retail. So I did a stint at John Lewis, FitFlop, Lacoste footwear, most recently at New Look, and I was involved in the sale of jewels to the Next group. So I've done some really interesting
You've gone top to toe in the fashion industry.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. Good way to put it.
And across all those different industries, what kind of differences do you see? I'm talking sort of generically, but what kind of differences do you see in how the function is perceived or respected or drawn upon for some of the business challenges?
Aside from the fact that I've worked in very different types of industry, I've also worked for very different ownership models or structures. So I've worked in blue chip financial services, which is heavily regulated, of course. I've worked in the regulated water industry, but I've also worked for founder-led organisations, worked very closely with Tom Jewell at Jules, and less closely, but with the founder, Marcia Kilgore at FitFlop, alongside Gianni, the CEO there. And then I've worked for PE, so the AA was PE, I was briefly there, and then New Look is PE backed. So really different organisational ownership models and structures. And I would say that has quite a bearing on the part that the people function plays. So I think in the regulated world of financial services, they are always one step ahead. They are held to account in the way they treat their people. Barclays in particular was unionised, so people was very much front and centre, and therefore the people function played a very leading role in terms of how the business was run and how it was organised, how the strategy was delivered. I would say, and I may be shocked for this, but I would say PE, probably not all, but some have a long way to go in terms of how they value or how they use the people function and people leadership. Of course, equity value is the most important thing there for PE. I think there's a bit of a catch-up required in terms of recognising that actually the people function can be a real driver of equity value. So yeah, very different experiences and different parts to play depending on really the ownership structure.
And that last point I think is really interesting. You know, we talk about the four hats of the CPO and the different roles that the CPO might have to play. We've got the service expert, the experience architect, the transformation enabler, and the compliance champion. And that either in different segments or at different times within a segment, the CPO may need to put focus in a particular area and sort of drive a particular one of those hats more strongly. So again, I think we certainly see that across various industries, that some hats will kind of come to the fore. But I just wonder, is there, not necessarily sort of hat related, but is there one role where you've seen it really consistent that actually a business really needs to see or have the CPO driving a certain kind of agenda within the organisation?
I think a great CPO will always not necessarily wear the hats themselves, but will build a team of people who wear those hats all the time. You wouldn't want me to run your people audit, to put it that way, or your people payroll. I wouldn't be the person for that, but I know people who are, and I build my teams accordingly. So rather than the CPO themselves having to wear different hats, I think the best CPOs will build teams of somebody who's always wearing those hats. So if I take, for instance, my fantastic head of HR operations at New Look, Lisa Nash, probably shouldn't put her name out there, she'll be pinched.
Bigging up Lisa though, so that's okay.
Absolutely. You know, I'm very clear that I could never have done my job without her doing her job consistently. So we may have had a problem in that area, or may have had a particular priority to focus on. For instance, we in the time that I was there, we input a new HRIS Dayforce, which went very, very well, thanks to Lisa's diligence, definitely not mine. And so that was a focus, but it was a focus for me occasionally when we were reporting on it to the board. It was a focus for her 100% of the time. Similarly, we did lots of change work, and maybe at Next, for instance, or Jules, the business partnering team were on that 100% of the time, meaning I could float about looking important, really. The CPO isn't a specialist and rarely has to specialise if they are astute and build brilliant teams of people who do that all the time.
Yeah, and again, I think we see that consistently. I guess the nugget is that you're accountable for all of it. We're fighting for a seat at the table. But similarly to you, I would never have been the one they'd give the clipboard for the audit. So it's drawing on your strengths, but also drawing on the team. But also then I wonder about, there's the phrase I hate. I've said many times on this podcast before that I get very frustrated at the phrase about having a seat at the table, and this kind of constant argument that we are having to fight for our seat at the table. My kind of butt against that is that the CPOs we speak to, so many of them are really well established at the table. Their feet are very under the table. They are part of that team. I was interested in when you described kind of what is a CPO up front. It's a leader of the business. It's not it happens to have a functional alignment to HR. So it's that kind of, I'm just interested in your perspective around that. Do you think CPOs have a seat at the table? Are they having to fight for that seat? Are they doing the right things when they have their seat at the table, just generally?
I personally am not fighting for a seat at the table, because if the seat isn't offered when I go into an organisation, then I wouldn't be there at all, never mind very long. I just don't buy it, really. I think people don't ask the CFO that. If you're running an organisation and you don't think your people are your number one priority, who drive the success of your business, that drive commercial gain, commercial advantage, and who deliver the strategy that you set, then you're not going to be in business very long, I would say. So people, no people, no business. Nobody's supporting the people, thinking about the people, whilst the marketing team is getting on with what they need to do, the tech team getting on what they need to do. Then the business will not, it might last, but it won't thrive. And that isn't a business I'd be very interested in being part of.
Yeah, and the costs would be high. We have this challenge around the seat at the table, and we talked about it recently where we said the CFO isn't asking for it. And recently I've been reflecting on how the CFO, the finance function isn't the most hated function in the business, but HR keeps getting all this kind of negative talk because of the things we're doing, or sometimes the things we're not doing, and that's a frustration. But again, it's if actually the role of the CPO is about being part of the leadership team of the business, then absolutely we need to be at that table. I think it's a key part of the role, right? And I think I agree with you. I think fighting for it is that the organisation you want to be in? And the only counter to that, I guess, is to what extent do you want to be influential in changing that mindset? Is it possible to kind of change that mindset in an organisation where HR is seen as the admin, compliance, kind of legal function? Is it possible to make that switch and say, actually, no, HR has a key role to play, to your point, in leading your business with a people lens? Or is that too much of an uphill battle?
Well, there's two schools of thought there, aren't there? I suppose you can either vote with your feet and not be part of an organisation like that, and choose to go elsewhere with your skills and experience, or you can decide to fight it and put your money where your mouth is, really deliver through people and demonstrate the value add that comes from a well-run people function and a very happy, content, giving of discretionary efforts group of colleagues. I think that's down to the individual. I'm possibly too I was going to say experienced, but I really mean old we'll go experience. To have to fight that fight anymore. I think my delivery speaks for itself. I probably wouldn't put myself in that position anymore.
And what about in the various roles that you've had, Nicky, the CEO expectations? Again, we've just done some research around how the C-suite sort of perceive the role of HR, the CPO, particularly in business transformation, for example. But one of the nuggets that we kind of drew out of that research was that actually the CEO typically thinks very highly of their CPO role and respects the CPO on a par with other C-suite members. Now, there shouldn't be a great kind of nugget of insight that should, it's what we all hope for. But I just wonder your experience in terms of, do the expectations of the CPO differ wildly from the CEO's perspective, or are you seeing that there's great alignment?
Great CEOs, as you say, expect that CPOs deliver commercial value. I would say, if we go back to when I'm thinking about, what my priorities are as a CPO, is it passing an audit at the moment, or is it landing a new HRIS, or is it a people transformation or a culture piece of work? And that's the area that I focus on. I think it's the same for the CEO. When, let's say, footfall in stores is down, if we're talking about a retail business, then their focus is on liaising with the retail director and what's happening in retail. What are we doing to turn that dial? If the problem of the day is we need to save £5 million from the payroll bill, then their focus will be on the CPO. But if their focus is on the CPO, then the retail director is still doing their job to the same degree as when the focus is on them. So I think, again, it's that consistency in each of the vertical functions 100% of the time, and the ability to answer any questions or live up to scrutiny and deliver when the focus is on you and you're part of the business, but you're always delivering. It's just sometimes more questions might be asked of you.
I used to do pre-lace facilitation around leadership teams, and one of the challenges was always we're operating in silos. We'd hear that all the time, and again, that is one of the challenges we've seen in some of that research that we've done in our white paper, From Implementer to Influencer, available on download. It's one of the challenges we've seen in that is the perception that HR is very siloed and does their HR thing. But I used to talk about it with leadership teams and say, tell me a bit about why you perceive you're siloed. Or I'd sit in their leadership team meeting and finance would go first with their update, and then IT would do their update, and then HR does their update. And I would say, this is why you're siloed, right? Because you are talking about what each vertical line is doing, rather than talking about a business challenge. Let's say, just very randomly and vaguely, we need better growth. Okay, how are we, with all our functional expertise, going to drive that growth and actually bring those ideas from across those verticals to present a cohesive solution to that challenge? And so I see it in pretty much every leadership team that I've ever worked in, is that kind of focus on what have you done today, HR, what have you done today, finance, rather than what are we doing consistently. My kind of observation. I wonder if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, I'm quite firm on this, and anybody who's worked with me in my teams or in my leadership teams will say, oh gosh, here she goes banging on about this again. But I think it starts before you have a business problem or a business problem statement to deal with. I think enough time is not invested in forming leadership communities. And what I mean by that, and I don't just mean C-suite or exec teams, I mean communities of heads of who really run the business, depending on your structure, and then the exec team that sets the strategy and leads teams. I think before you start tackling a problem, you've got to have invested in building that community first. So, understanding how each other ticks, how you work best, what are your red buttons, for want of a better word. What am I going to get from you when I need help? Would I come to you or would I come to somebody else? Do you really understand what makes me tick? Do you really understand what my problems are day to day? Do you care? Do we care about each other? And you only care about each other if you know each other. So I think, without being too woo-woo, I think that there's got to be time invested on building those leadership communities before you get to enterprise leadership, where people really tackle a problem as a whole business. You'll be forever siloed if you don't invest in that up front. I think it's one of my bugbears, or one of my pet projects when I go into a new organisation, and rarely have organisations, particularly when money is tight, invested in that at the outset.
And when you've seen that done well, Nick, what kind of things are you seeing? What sort of, interventions or behaviours or actions are you seeing?
I've seen it done well a couple of times, and you usually have to invest in external support, somebody who is specialist in doing that work, and you usually have to stick with that person or outfit, organisation for the long term, so that they build with you and they adapt the interventions to support that development journey. But then what comes from that is greater understanding, patience, ability to depend on one another when the going gets tough, whether it's going back to the people director and the retail director depending on each other when really their day-to-day issues are quite separate. But just having a common understanding leads to greater harmony, I think, and therefore improved outputs when you've got a problem to solve.
I'm also just interested in, again, going back to the first question about what is a CPO, and you talked about sort of is a leader of the business. What are your sort of top tips for people in terms of how to demonstrate that? How do you, as the CPO, demonstrate that you are a leader of the business?
Much earlier in my career, I heard a CPO say that she had come very late to understanding how the business made money, bottom line.
Yeah,
we do this, we get that, and what impacts us making money, what impacts it positively, what impacts it negatively, what are the interventions we put in place when those two things happen to reduce the issue or enhance the positive impact. And when she did that, when she invested that time to really understand that, she saw both her career take off and felt the impact that she was having much more positively. And that really stuck with me. And I think that the best CPOs, it stands to reason, of course, and certainly in line with what I was saying about being a leader rather than just a vertical specialist, you've got to understand how the business makes its money, what your function can do, and how it will work with the other functions, again, back to that enterprise leadership, to impact that bottom line. I hate to use the word bottom line because it's such a cliche, but that's it really. And I think if you understand that fundamentally, you get that seat at the table because people understand, or people recognise that you understand what you're talking about, that you only make decisions based on driving either equity value or profit or whatever it is that the company values. And therefore you gain a greater respect both for the decisions that you make as an individual and the part that your function plays in the overall strategy of the business. So I think the best CPOs, first and foremost, understand the commercial drivers of the business.
That aligns brilliantly, Nicky, with a piece of work we did around what are some of the critical skills for the CPO of the future. And that was absolutely number one. So that was, we did a light touch piece of research. We asked, what were CEOs looking for when they hired CPOs? And that's the answer to the question is, I mean, a few other things, but in the top three was commerciality, exactly that. Because again, it's about understanding the influence you can have, right, on the success of the business or on the business agenda. And I think what we identified was, how can CPOs really pull some of those levers? And it's that understanding of the implications of some of the people strategy, for example, that are going to have an impact on that bottom line or efficiency or, sales increase or whatever it is, that was seen as really key in CPOs of the future. Do you care about the name? I mean, CPO, CHRO, people director, what else do you have? People and culture director, chief happiness officer. Do you care what people are called?
Do I care? I think people who have reached this level of seniority and then say they don't care what they're called are telling big fibs. You do not float to the top of an organisational structure. Do not get there by accident. You get there by making considered choices, by making some sacrifices and turning left instead of right or vice versa. So to say that, I'm really agnostic about that, it's just not true. You will have a vision for yourself and the part that you play, and your title defines that to the outside world. So I think you can have an overinflated title. I wouldn't expect to be a CHRO in a business of 150 people. But equally, if you wanted to call me a head of HR and I was running the people function for a business of 10,000, then I might have a problem with that. And of course, the remuneration will run alongside that often. So I think it depends is the answer, as it is to so many questions. It depends on the business. It depends on the individual. But I think the people who say, I don't mind what you call me, be very wary of that.
My last question for today is the kind of future focused question, Nicky, is what's out there for us? What's the future look like for the CPO, given all the kind of chaos that's around us, the continuing change, the challenges in the economic environment? What do you think the future of the CPO looks like?
Well, I think it's a continuation, building teams of brilliant people who specialise in the things that you don't, because by nature you're a generalist. So definitely getting really good at that. I think as any leader, and not necessarily people, but as any leader, you should be networking. You should be networking for your own career. You should be networking for the good of the organisation you're working with, to bring in new ideas, new ways of doing things. I think you've got to be able to prove that you don't just add value by taking cost out of a business, which is so often the case, but that you can add value in terms of maximising what you've got to play with and adding value from that. Adaptability is always key. CPOs are doing very different things now than they were 20 years ago, staying up to date in terms of legal changes, but different ways of doing things. I mean, we've got through 40 minutes and we've not mentioned AI, which I think is a miracle. I've just ruined it for us. I'm sorry.
You did so well.
Yeah, but I haven't talked about working from home though and flexibility, have I? So
no.
Point to me. It's staying on top. It's staying not ahead of the game, but just making sure that you are up to speed on what's going on, not just in your specialism, HR people, but in your industry. And if you're specialising in an industry, that you really become an expert in how that industry is running and what changes are coming, so that you can get ahead of the game internally in the business to just keep on adding value. You've got to keep finding different ways to add value, and it can't always be taking money off the bottom line, which is, as I say, so often the case.
So we've talked about commerciality, we've mentioned AI just once, but do you think there are any other kind of critical skills that a CPO needs to kind of get on top of to be future fit?
I think you have to be a knitter together of people. You have to be, execs are a tricky bunch sometimes, but often, always. So you have to be able to bring these disparate teams together, people with different ideas, different priorities. Egos feature in there as well. I've put mine in there as well. You have to be able to bring teams together and get them working as one. That will always be a challenge, and it will be a different challenge depending on the set of people that you're working with.
And every time a new person comes into that team, you're almost starting again, right? Look, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to, as we continue this kind of mini series, exploring more and different views around what the CPOs are. I've said before, Nicky, I don't know your view about this, but I'd love to have a CEO on this conversation, or a CFO, to tell us their perception of the CPO and what they expect from that kind of role. So we're just always putting a shout out for CPOs, CEOs, CFOs, COOs, see anything to come on and talk to us about the CPO role and what those expectations are. And again, the mission here is really just to get different perspectives around what the CPO role is in this mini series on the People Agenda podcast. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, and we look forward to our listeners hearing us next time again on the People Agenda podcast.